Here's how to score 5 points on the extended constructed response for 6th through 8th grade. Angela here from Custom Classroom, helping make test prep simple. After studying the released constructed response scoring guide for STAAR from the TEA for grades 6 through 8, I looked through and figured out a couple key points that are important for a student to score 5 points. And in this, I broke down this response that scored 5 points when it was graded by a STAAR grader. There are a couple parts to the rubric for how students can score 5 points. The first 3 points come from organization and development of ideas, and the next 2 points come from their conventions. So to give a little background, this writing response was based on a passage called Mission Ready, and here it talked about how difficult it was to first become an astronaut and then all the training that's required after becoming one before you ever actually go on a mission. So the prompt was, explain how the author develops the idea in the article that it is not easy to become a NASA astronaut. So first I'm going to go look at where students can score 3 points in organization and development of ideas. So I'm going to read through this passage and then I'm going to go through why it scored a 5. Being an astronaut is not an easy task. You have to go through lots of training to get into the NASA programs. And even if you get through all the training, there is not a high chance that you will make it into the program. For example, in 2017, there was about 15,000 applications for getting selected into NASA's new astronaut class, but only 12 people out of the 18,000 were selected for that class. And even if you make it to the NASA program, you have to go through harsh training before you get to go on your first mission. Though lots of training has to be done with problems and issues you face when on your missions. Even a current astronaut said it himself. Arnold says that much of his training focuses on preparing for problems that might come up in space. Paragraph 10. And NASA relies on Russian spacecrafts to get the crew to and from the ISS. This is why you have to study the Russian language, which astronauts spend long periods of time in Russian facilities. A difficult task that astronauts aboard the ISS face is going outside the station to do repairs. This is why they practice this in the buoyancy lab in Houston. It is the largest indoor pool in the world, and the conditions there are close to those in space when you dive in astronauts' space suits. This is why becoming an astronaut is not easy, and even after you become an astronaut, you have to go through lots of harsh training after. And this is why becoming an astronaut is a difficult process. So the first point is scored because the writer offers a clear, controlling idea where they state directly an answer to the question. Even after you make it into the NASA program, you have to go through harsh training before you get to go on your first mission. The next part is part of the organization, and here they have an effective introduction, and it's these first couple sentences about being an astronaut and not being an easy task. Now, I find it interesting that they still gave credit for this introduction, even though it was not set apart in its own paragraph. And there's also a conclusion present where they wrap up the ideas and restate their answer. Within organization, they were also given credit for their structure. And here, they basically got the points because they were able to effectively maintain focus on their idea that the training that occurred after acceptance was hard. And so they were able to stay on point through this middle part of their writing. Next, they also use transition words such as for example or though, and these help flow through their ideas in their response. And next part that is greatly important is directly quoted evidence. And so here you can say they took a specific part of the text to support their answer, and even better, they put what paragraph it came from. But you can also include paraphrased evidence that will still count as using evidence. So here's just an example where they talk about the difficult task that the astronauts aboard the ISS face in going outside the station to do repairs. So this is mostly from the passage, but they've paraphrased it a little bit so it counts. And the key here in middle school is that they're also looking for you to explain your evidence. So they want to see that, okay, here's the evidence, and now I'm explaining why. And so here in pink, you can see some of the connecting parts where they explain their evidence and how it actually supports their idea. Specifically, that the problems and issues that they're facing, and then additionally, they're having to learn the Russian language. The last part here is looking for expression of ideas, that they're clear and effective, and specifically word choice is looked at here, and they're looking for specific words. So if you try to talk too much in general about the big idea, then you might lose credit here. You want to be very specific. Use words from the text and directly talk about the idea. Don't kind of beat around the bush. That means don't try to get too broad of ideas. Very specifically state exactly what you're trying to say and talk directly about the passage. Now, this student received 3 points because they were able to highlight all of these parts from the rubric. The next part we're going to move on to is the last 2 points you can earn to get a 5, and that's the conventions. So here, after reading over this passage, there were very few errors, and so they were scored as having consistent command of grade level appropriate convention. So what that means is if you make some mistakes that are not something that's directly within 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, and it's a harder concept, that's okay. But on the things that you should know based on how you word your sentences, punctuation, capitalization, grammar, and spelling, then those could affect your grade, specifically if there's a lot and it impacts the grader's ability to understand what you're trying to communicate. So here, this student had one error in punctuation where they just missed apostrophe, and then they misspelled a word. So in here, these do not affect the ability to understand the message they're trying to get across. So they got 2 points. So to sum it up, if you're able to include these things, you are going to have a much higher chance of receiving all 5 points on your extended constructed response. So you want to have a very clear, controlling idea that answers the question that's being asked directly. You need to include an introduction and conclusion. You need to maintain focus and stay on the topic of your answer and exactly what you're trying to express through your writing. You want to use some transition words to help the flow of your writing. You absolutely have to include quoted evidence. You can do some paraphrased, but it helps to use directly quoted evidence. And you need to explain this evidence and how it specifically supports your answer to the question. When you are writing, you want to be very specific in the words you choose, that you're directly tying back to the text, and have few errors so that whoever the reader is able to understand what you are trying to say. So if you're looking to practice more extended constructed response questions, check out my free resources. If you're wanting to learn more about the changes to STAAR 2.0, check out some of my other videos. Good luck.